Welcome to Generations, a show which helps people 50 and better lead happy, healthy, and productive lives. Here's today's moderator, Nadia Jordana.
Hello and welcome to Generations. I'm Nadia Jordana and I'll be our moderator for today. But before we get into the program, let me introduce my co-hosts, Dave Lapaco. Welcome, Dave.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
It's good to have you on the show today.
Really happy to have Barry here today. So.
And Lynn Garthwaite.
Hi, nice to see you.
Yeah, I'm glad to have
Thanks
you
for having
subbing
me.
on the show
Yeah,
today.
thank you.
It was good that we could get a hold of you and have you come on the show.
Thank you, yes.
And our special guest today is Barry ZeVan. Most people will remember Barry. Barry, welcome.
Thank you very much. Wonderful to be here.
It's great to have you on the show today. And well, let's start out by talking about how you got into show business originally, if you want to call it show business.
Well, I think it was, since my grandfather was Milton Berle's and George Burns and Gracie Allen's first agent. That's about as show business as you can get. And he was also first violinist for the Pittsburgh Symphony, and he had orchestras too in western Pennsylvania. Pittsburgh's my hometown.
So you came from Pittsburgh?
That's where I was born. Yeah.
Was it kind of an expectation to go into
Well, it
performing?
would take a year to tell you the story. It's in my book, as a matter of fact. But no, my mother realized that I could sing. So at age 5.5, I started on the world's first radio station, KDKA, on February 20th, 1943. And so anyway, after that, I started taking drama lessons at the Pittsburgh Playhouse with a girl named Shirley Jones. And she became Miss Pittsburgh in 1951. But our drama teacher, Bill Putch, later married a lady named Jean Stapleton, who became Archie Bunker's wife and all in the family.
Right.
And my older daughter actually dated Jean Stapleton's son when we lived in Washington, D.C. So show business has been my life forever. And I started acting. I was on Mr. Peepers for 2 years with Wally Cox and Tony Randall. Tony was like a father to me. And then I sang on the Perry Como show years later for 2.5 years as one of the Ray Charles singers.
On Perry Como?
On Perry Como, and worked with every giant in the business. And Rosemary Clooney and I were the most friendly together.
Wow.
And she had me MC a show for her in Edmonton, Alberta years later. So.
How did you get to Minnesota and become a weatherman?
Oh boy. I hope I can make it as a soundbite. Bob Newhart got me here. He suggested when I was on television in Las Vegas that I should be in a bigger market. And so KSTP hired me. I sent a tape, and that's how I got here. Thanks to Mr. Newhart, who's still alive, thank goodness. And so became a weatherman because of the U.S. Air Force. I had been in show business, and I lost a part to a friend of mine. I went to a high school in New York for kids who were acting. We weren't learning how to act, we were actually acting. And Sal Mineo was one of the kids in my school. The other kids were Elliot Gould, Leslie Uggams, Tuesday Weld, Sandra Dee, Patty Duke, Carol Lindley. We were all together. Right. I always say I'm the only one who failed. And so anyway, Sal got this particular part that I supposedly had. I got so discouraged, I joined the Air Force, and there were two things open to study to become your job, motor pool or meteorology, and I took the meteorology. Wow. And when I got out of the Air Force, I didn't think it would ever mean anything to me at all. And my first television station, sorry for the voice today, my first television station was in Missoula, Montana, and the boss, after I started there as a switcher, director, announcer, he said, "Do you know anything about the weather?" I said, "Oh yes, I do." I showed him my little Air Force certificate, and that's how I started doing my first weathercast.
Wow.
That's kind of an interesting way to get to it without planning ahead, but that worked out great, and you're well remembered for that in Minnesota. But there have been a lot more things that you've done since then, and you have a book recently that is a memoir that talks a lot about your career, your lifetime, and many of the celebrities that you have met and worked with along the
Well,
way.
more than met, I was blessed to have them include me in their real lives, in their personal lives. Robert Goulet was one of them, Howard Keel was another, Katherine Grayson, Sammy Davis Jr.,
was a
Juliette
favorite.
Prowse, Red Fox, Louis Prima. I've had times at their houses for lunch and dinner, and it never ends.
I'm hoping you can come up with a good Howard Hughes story, because that man was so interesting.
Well, I worked for Howard Hughes. I was head of broadcast operations out in Las Vegas, and promotion manager, as well as being on the air, doing the weather. And I got sick one year with valley fever. I was in the hospital for a month. He paid my entire hospital bill when I got out to pay my bill. But also another story, I didn't know that he cared that much about me. And so when I quit Hughes to go to the ABC station, we were CBS with Hughes. The orchestra leader at the Frontier Hotel, he and I were having Coca-Cola one afternoon, and he said, do you know that, and so this was 2 months after I quit Hughes, and he said, do you know that Howard Hughes loved you? And I said, well, I had no idea he even cared or whatever, except for that hospital bill. And he said, oh yes. He said, do you remember getting a phone call one night asking if you were changing your style? It was a night that I wasn't feeling that well, and I just did it pretty straight, did the weather pretty straight. And so this wonderful voice on the phone in the control room after the program said, Mr. ZeVan, are you changing your style of presentation? I said, no, I just don't feel well tonight. He said, oh, thank you, that's all we wanted to know. We was Howard Hughes,
Oh, my.
not himself talking, but one of his aides who quit and told my friend the story. Hughes had him call me to find out if I was changing my style.
Well,
Yes.
I'm sure when you are with celebrities, some of them seem very mortal, very flawed, maybe not even very likable in real life. Are there people of the celebrities you've had contact with who are kind of on the other end, where it's like they really were exceptional people, and they stand out as people who really were larger than life, and people who I have tremendous affection for because I know them at a more intimate level, and I know what wonderful people they really are?
Great question. The top of the list is Gregory Peck. I was with him several times, and he even did a promo for me for my weather. And such a gentleman. Yeah, I mean, I can't even describe it. He was phenomenal. Another was Robert Goulet. Goulet cared. Another was Gene Kelly and Donald O'Connor, especially Donald. And when Donald died, his daughter said one of the last things he said in life was, I want to thank the Academy for my Lifetime Achievement Award. He was never recognized for any award, and he was pretty bitter about it, and it hurt, because Donald was brilliant. I'm trying to think who else. Yeah, there are so many. But on the reality side, Peck would be at the top of the list.
Oh, I loved him. Yeah.
Oh, he was phenomenal.
Yeah.
And so sweet, so unspoiled. As a matter of fact, there was a story about Peck, I think it's in my book, when even though he was the son of a very successful pharmacist in San Diego, actually La Jolla, and when Greg decided to start acting, he went to New York, and he actually slept on park benches because he couldn't afford the rent.
Wow.
And to think of Gregory Peck on a park bench because he couldn't afford the rent is kind of surreal. But you know, the people in the business who, unless your name's Rockefeller or Gates or Buffett, and you have no worries about money, so many people in this business who succeeded had some pretty rough times in the beginning.
Well, even once they succeed, I was going to ask you this. You know, you've been in the limelight quite a bit. Certainly locally, you were a household name when you were doing the weather here and stuff. Is there any downside to that, to being in the public eye all the time, being quote unquote successful, things that really people don't appreciate as being problems or shortcomings of that?
That's a fabulous question. First of all, gratitude for the audience liking what you do stands out for me. The downside sometimes, and it's kind of a funny downside, is, and I've had it happen to me, is people eating your French fries off your plate when you're sitting at a restaurant. Oh, Mr. ZeVan, I love you. Here, I'm going to take more
They
French
just feel
fries.
like they know you?
Yes,
Yeah.
and I don't blame them, and I can see the reasoning behind it, because we ourselves, any of us at this table, if we were at a particular restaurant or something and somebody we loved or was famous came, you do feel as though you know them.
Right.
They've been in your living rooms
Right.
forever. One of the wonderful ones who comes to mind, and actually there are clips of him and me on the internet, is Don Rickles. Don was so sweet in person.
Oh, nice.
And but I did one interview with him on television, and he ended it by saying, "Don't ever ask me to do this again, Barry," because of course that's the way Don was.
Yeah.
But as a human being,
Right.
the sweetest man in the world.
That's interesting. I've heard a lot of people say that about him, but I mean, my impression was what he wanted people to
Right.
think, the insult king, and it. Maybe I'm extra sensitive, but it really got to me when he would say those things to other people. I just did not like him. So it's wonderful to hear that he really is a nice guy, or was a nice guy.
He was. He was very sweet.
And I think part of the reason you were so approachable in those kind of circumstances is because that was your character
Yeah.
on the weathercast. So, you just were that fun guy that we figured could fit into our household and whatever. So-
Well, as I say, and it's so gratifying. I mean, thanks to the audience, you survive. I mean, without an audience,
Right.
you're not making a living. And I just no, it also is kind of surreal, because when you get home at night, you know who you are.
Right.
It's not that you're different than what you were on television, but there is a television presence and persona that you do. Because it was just fun,
Right.
And anything I did was natural. If I looked around at the camera, it was because I was trying to keep eye contact with the audience, period. That's how that all started in Missoula, Montana.
And everybody remembers it.
Yeah. So, I mean, wow, how lucky can you get?
Right.
I mean, and I'm not saying that in a gratuitous way or a false humility. I really mean that.
Nice.
I mean, oh, God, what a blessing.
How do you wind down at the end? You're very busy yet still, and how do you wind down at the end of a day?
It's very difficult for me, because my brain is one of those brains that keeps twirling long after it hits the pillow. And I just, it's hilarious. I got to know Mike Lindell a little bit, and he has this My Pillow thing,
yes.
not giving a commercial here. But, so we got a couple of his pillows, before I ever met Mike. And when I lay my head down at night, a lot of times I'll say, no, this is not the best night's sleep in the world I've ever had, because my brain is still working.
Yeah.
And it does work into the night. So pretty hard for me to wind down.
Yeah.
I think when I was younger, pardon me, and I had a full-time job doing the weather, obviously, I mean, first of all, you have the security. And so when we would go on trips or something like that, I kind of wound down. But the brain always still
Yeah.
kept working.
Yeah.
Sorry for the long
No,
answer.
that's
No,
great. That's great.
I wanted to circle back a little bit. You mentioned Rosemary Clooney at one point, and let's talk about luck. Did you ever have the luck to meet her dreamboat of a nephew, George Clooney?
No, and I've always wanted to meet him.
Oh, there's still
In fact,
time.
I'm working on things that hopefully we hope to have him involved in. I know his father too, Nick.
Okay, yeah.
But
Could you bring him back here to the Twin Cities so we can all meet him?
listen, I'll be lucky if I meet him on Lake Como. You know?
Yeah. Cool.
Well, and you met Elvis.
Yes, I
You
did.
knew Elvis. Tell us a little bit about that story.
Well, a friend of mine had been on the Milton Berle show. He was pretty well known at the time and was working in Las Vegas. And so Irv Benson was his name. So it's in the book, but anyway, Irv said, hey, you want to meet Elvis? He said, I know exactly where he's going to be tonight. This was the night after he was married. So that night, Irv was performing at the Silver Slipper on the Strip. He had me come over, and who's sitting at the next table to me but Johnny Carson?
Oh, my.
And so Carson was looking at me daggers because Irv introduced me first from the audience,
Oh, my.
then Johnny second. So, and Johnny, I'll never forget him tapping his fingers like this and looking at me daggers. For whatever reason, I guess it's because he was introduced second. So Irv said, let's go up to the Aladdin. I know exactly where Elvis is going to be. Well, he was at a blackjack table. And he's sitting on the end, and Priscilla is sitting right next to him looking daggers at him. Yeah. And here's the night after they're married, and all he's doing is playing blackjack. So Irv introduced me, and Elvis says, oh, he said, I know who you are. He said, I watch you when I'm here. He said, I like your work. I said, well, thank you, sir. I like your work, too. And so we had a little snack afterward because Irv and I stayed, and Elvis had said to him, apparently previously, come on, let's all have a little snack after I'm done playing. So it was Elvis and Priscilla and Irv and me at a little table at the Aladdin, and I don't know what I had, probably hot chocolate and something. And so anyway, after that, I mean, first of all, he was so sweet. He was so gentle and soft-spoken. But after that, years after that, I got to meet Priscilla. I got to interview her several times for films. And I reminded her of that story, and she said, Barry, I don't remember you, but I remember that night. Yeah. She said, I was so angry with him because he's playing blackjack the night after we're married.
Well, it's still their honeymoon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's my Elvis time,
that
but
is
he
so
was very, very sweet and gentle.
Yeah.
A gentleman.
Yeah. Well, it kind of sounds like one of the secrets to your success has been, I guess we'd call it networking, that you just have made these contacts, and from that developed other contacts, which I think probably opened some doors for you that other people they don't quite know how to do that, or they aren't able to do that. You know, they don't have access to people.
Number one, I was born into the business.
Yeah.
So all these people, they were part of my life.
Right.
Networking, that's part of it. But most of it was actually being at the right place at the right time. And, you know, having the luck to all of a sudden, here I am, and they're showing up and I'm showing up, and wow. I mean, Kenny Walken, Christopher Walken's brother, he and I went to high school too in New York. And I met Chris when he was just 7 or 8 years old.
Oh, my.
He's an interesting
And
person.
Yeah.
I'm telling you, first of all, he's a brilliant performer, brilliant actor, but he looked up at me. I'll never forget the look, and it was like the seed of Chucky. He had this look on his face, and Kenny said, don't pay any attention to him. We were walking down Broadway, and Kenny said, oh, here's my little brother, Chris. And I said, hey, Chris, and he gives me a look which I can't replicate on television. And that was it. And in future years, he is definitely a character. But God bless him. I mean, as I say, not being solicitous, he's one of the most brilliant performers ever.
Yeah.
And I think he and his wife, Georgianne, who's one of the huge casting directors in this world, they've been married forever, too. So I'll say that for Chris, too. I mean, he's a real family man.
Good.
They had a bakery in Queens, and Kenny used to bring us, you know, either donuts or something, bring them to school because of the bakery. But it was Walken's Bakery. And so Chris was not raised in a lavish style, but they weren't poor either.
Right.
you know, they did pretty well.
That's good to have a friend who owns a bakery, though.
Yes.
Isn't that a bad deal?
And if this ever reaches Chris on YouTube and he watches, hi, Chris.
Yeah. That look is memorable.
You scared the heck out of me when you were 7 years old.
Well, speaking of YouTube, you know, I was thinking, I watched a couple of your old weather performances from the 70s on YouTube last night. And how do you deal with all the technological changes in communication? So, you know, meteorology is different. Trying to market things is different. There's YouTube and Facebook and Snapchat and Spotify and Twitter. I mean, are you adapting well to this? Because I, for one, struggle sometimes to make the conversion to 21st century technology.
I kind of am, and I kind of am nostalgic about how it was. God bless him, Louis Anderson. I was at a party with him last May, and he said, Barry, he said, you still have it. He said, I want you to do the weather the way you used to do it. We can call it retro weather, and he said, I'll be part of it. I'll introduce you. And he said, we can do it on YouTube. He said, because once it's monetized, that could be a nice extra living for you at the end of your years. And I said, well, God bless you. Thank you, Louis. So how should we do it? He said, just do it. So last Wednesday, I know this is being taped at a certain time, but last Wednesday, April 10th, I did my first show with Louis. And it's called Louis Anderson Introduces Barry ZeVan, the Retro Weatherman. And good. We're on YouTube now, taping once a week, but of course on YouTube it's on there forever. So tonight I'm going to reference the fire at Notre Dame to prove to people this is a real show in real time and not an old show, etc. And the reference I'm going to make to Notre Dame, to which I've been many times, is the weather played a huge part in the firefighters being able to fight it because the skies were clear in Paris that night. And so I'm going to reference that, saying, hey, the weather was an important factor in, you know, having the firefighters do their job without problems from the weather. And so that's, it has started.
We'll be looking for that.
Well, thank you. Gregory Peck, all the stars in Las Vegas, not all, but most of them, did promos for me. Gregory Peck was one of them. And we used his intro, or his promo last week, and he got on and he said, Barry ZeVan, the weatherman, is alive and well. Well, let's just say he's alive and leave it at that.
That's perfect.
I wrote these for them. Yes. Jimmy Durante, one we're going to use tonight, he did two of them. The one we're using tonight is, Barry ZeVan, the weatherman, has got a real nose for weather. And he grabs my nose and says, and who would know better than me? And then Sammy Davis, Jimmy did another one too, which I won't go into, but it was wonderful. But Sammy said, Barry ZeVan, he said, ladies and gentlemen, having traveled around the world many times, I can say this honestly. I like Barry ZeVan, the weatherman, because then he doesn't say anything. And I'm going like this on camera to feed. And he says, well, I'll think of something. Stick with me.
Think of something.
Yeah.
That's good.
So.
Good to have friends. You know what, back when you were doing weather locally, did they used to send meteorologists out in the middle of hurricanes to demonstrate how windy it was? Because that's a lot crazy.
Very interesting question. Yeah. Not here at KSTP, but when I was on the air in Detroit, they flew me down to Biloxi, Mississippi, because from Keesler Air Force Base, they fly these Hurricane Hunter planes out. I was in the middle of Hurricane David for 12 hours.
Wow.
Going back and forth, through the eye and then in and out. That's the way they do an X pattern. And we did that then.
Yeah.
And that was several years after I left KSTP.
Okay.
But I'm not saying that KSTP or any station here would not do that.
Right.
You know, send you out.
Locally, it's blizzards, snow blizzards.
Yeah. Oh, gosh.
But yeah, we don't get too many hurricanes here. But It always just seems crazy to me that they latch somebody to a pole out in the middle of it just to let us know it was windy.
Well, the Weather Channel now is owned by Byron Allen, one of Louis Anderson's bosses, by the way. And Byron has his people doing that. I mean, recently there was a situation where the guy could not stand up.
Wow.
Yeah, and we even had this recently here in the Twin Cities where the winds were so strong. And I was trying to get out from the post office to my car, and I was afraid.
Yeah.
Because you get almost blown down.
Right, right. Like falling off a roof.
So,
Yeah, breaking bones and things like that.
yeah, not too much fun.
So for all the things you've done on the talent side of the camera, if you could only do one or two of them for the rest of your time, what would be the choices you'd make? What, would you be a singer? Would you be an actor? Would you be a talk show host? Would you be a weather person?
I'd be a news analyst and a news anchor.
Oh,
All right.
interesting.
It's really interesting you asked that question, because I have done newscasts. I've anchored news. But that's my favorite thing to do.
Oh.
And I had a cousin, Cecil Brown, who was one of Edward R. Murrow's boys in London during World War II.
Oh.
My cousin Cecil was one of the boys with Walter Cronkite and Eric Sevareid. And I learned a lot from Cecil. His mother and my grandmother were sisters. And my mom grew up with him in Pittsburgh. But I'm really into news. I'm really into news and news analysis.
Yeah.
So truthfully, if I could have my druthers and my dream job, it would be to be a news anchor on CNN
I wouldn't
or
have
whatever.
guessed that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have either.
Before we run out of time, Barry, do you have a website?
Yes, I do.
What's your
Yeah,
website?
It's really simple. It's, of course, the 3 W's, BarryZeVan.com.
BarryZeVan.com. And what's the name of your book?
Oh, it's called My Life Among the Giants, a memoir. And the subtitle is Thank You, Jerry Stiller, for urging me to write this book, which he did. There was a picture of Jerry and me down at the bottom of the book, too. But on the front of the cover, it says, Thank you, Jerry Stiller, for urging me to write this book.
And
I'm
it sounds
looking
like
forward
and
to
it
reading
sounds like it's jam-packed full of great stories
Oh.
that people will just
Well,
love.
I hope they would love them, but
Yeah.
lots of stories.
Yeah.
And things that people, they're surprises that people would not expect about these people, too. And as far as nice people, too, Jerry Stiller had been like a older brother to me forever.
Nice.
Wonderful.
And I can never praise him enough. He's 90 years old now.
Yeah.
So,
Well, thank you for being on the show, Barry.
Thank you.
And thank you, Dave, for co-hosting.
Pleasure to be here.
It's good to have you here. And Lynn, thank you, too.
Glad to be back. Thank
It
you.
is good.
Yeah.
It's kind of a fun day today. And thank you for watching Generations. We'll see you all next time.